The Pax Britannica, Europe between Napoleon and the Great War, the Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna was a meeting between the European powers of Britain, France, Russia, Prussia, and Austria between 1814 and 1815, and the objective was to provide a long-term peace plan for Europe by settling issues arising from the French Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars. The goal wasn't to restore the pre-Napoleon boundaries, but to resize the main powers so they could balance each other and remain at peace. After Napoleon was finally defeated at Waterloo, these were the main points that the Congress confirmed. France was deprived of all territory conquered by Napoleon. Russia was given most of the Duchy of Warsaw, or modern day Poland. Prussia was given half of Saxony, parts of Poland, and other German territories. A German confederation of over 30 states was created from the previous 300 under Austrian rule. Austria recovered territory it lost, plus more in Germany and Italy. Britain was given the Cape Colony, Sri Lanka, and various colonies in Africa and Asia. The transatlantic slave trade was condemned, urged by the British, and the freedom of navigation was guaranteed for many rivers. One of the most important aspects of the Congress was that Britain and France came to an agreement that if any crisis were to arise in Europe, they would consult and help each other as a counterweight to Russia. Pax Britannica. The Pax Britannica, Latin for British peace, describes the century between 1815 and the beginning of World War I in 1914, a period of relative stability and peace in Europe. With the final defeat of Napoleon in 1815, Britain was left without a serious colonial rival. With the Congress of Vienna, the powers on the European continent were balanced and did not pose a serious threat to the island nation, so they were able to focus on their international empire. The British Royal Navy emerged as the largest naval presence on the seas, allowing Britain to dominate sea trade routes, to spread their culture and ideas globally, and remain largely unchallenged for the rest of the century. With the unmatched dominance of the British Navy, they ruled over the sea lanes, and outside of their formal empire, they had de facto control of trade with China, Thailand, and Argentina. The British, heavily influenced by Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, adopted a free trade policy in 1840, repealing the trade tariff known as the Corn Laws. British unrestricted global trade facilitated industrialization at home. Such British dominance made their currency, the pound sterling, the world's reserve currency. British imperial strength was only increased by the development of steamships and the telegraph in the mid 19th century. The British also enforced the American Monroe Doctrine, which warned European powers to end further colonization attempts and not to interfere with affairs in the Western Hemisphere, as this was the United States' sphere of influence. Britain enforced this as they feared further European meddling in the Western Hemisphere would interfere with their trade, and therefore used their navy as a deterrent for any potential military actions in Latin America, further reducing the power of Spain and Portugal, who were discouraged from reconquering lost colonies. The Crimean War. Tensions arose between the Ottomans, French, and Russians over who would have authority over the Christians in the Ottoman Empire. The French and Russians desperately wanted this title, as they would then be able to project power in the Middle East through the churches. The Ottomans ultimately chose the French, leading war to be declared in 1853 after the Russians sent soldiers into Ottoman territory. France and Britain then stepped in on the side of the Ottomans in 1854 to hinder Russian expansion and invade the Crimean Peninsula in September 1854. The Prussians remained neutral in this conflict, and while the Russians and Austrians were allies, they were also afraid of Russian expansion and did not aid their Russian allies, ending the Holy Alliance of the Russians, Austrians, and Prussians. The allied forces of Britain, France, and the Ottomans, and the Kingdom of Sardinia and Piedmont were able to defeat and humiliate the Russians in 1856. Territorial boundaries went back to what they were before the war, minus minor land losses of the Russians to the Ottomans. The Russians began reforms and modernized their army, freeing the serfs, allowing them to fight, which bolstered their numbers, but also was the beginning of the end for the Russian Tsardom. The push to modernize in Russia also led to a rise of nationalism in the Russian Empire and increased Russian interference in the Balkans, leading to a rise of nationalistic independence movements there. The British also began reforms in the medical field as they lost many more soldiers to disease rather than actual fighting. Italian unification. Since the fall of Rome, the Italian peninsula had been divided by numerous independent states and often heavily influenced by foreign powers. Though these kingdoms shared the same peninsula, they were very different culturally and had no real desire to unify into a single state. By the mid-19th century, the Kingdom of Sardinia and Piedmont was the only true independent Italian kingdom. When the revolutions of 1848 swept across Europe, uprisings took place in Milan and Venice against the Austrians, in Sicily against Naples, and in Rome a republic was declared which challenged the rule of the Pope. However, these revolutions were ultimately squashed. Minister Camillo di Cavour and Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia see these revolutions as an opportunity to finally unify Italy, but they need allies, and they find an ally in Napoleon III of France. With the French as their allies, Piedmont and Sardinia launched war against the Austrians in northern Italy and quickly defeat them. After their victory, the central Italian states vote to join Piedmont and Sardinia overwhelmingly. With support from the British, Giuseppe Garibaldi invaded and conquered Sicily and pushed north until he entered Naples to celebration. After completing the defeat of the Neapolitan army, Garibaldi meets with King Victor Emmanuel II at Teano and hands over his territorial acquisitions in the south to him, and the Kingdom of Italy is announced in 1861. Italy was given control of Venice in 1866 by the Treaty of Vienna and became fully unified in 1870 with the capture of Rome after the withdrawal of French troops due to the Franco-Prussian War. With Italy unified, it became the fifth most populous nation in Europe, creating another large European power. The Franco-Prussian War and German unification. Hostilities rose again on the continent when the Queen of Spain was ousted in a revolution and the throne was left vacant in 1868. The Spanish looked abroad for a new monarch, and the best candidate was Leopold, the Prince of Hohenzollern. Leopold was convinced to take the throne in 1870 by Otto von Bismarck and King Wilhelm I of the Northern German Confederation, which was primarily dominated by the Prussians. Napoleon III, the ruler of France, highly objected to this idea, as then he would be surrounded by a Germanic-Spanish alliance. Napoleon III then demanded King Wilhelm retract his support for Leopold for the Spanish throne, but Wilhelm declined. The account of the meeting was edited in a way to upset both the French and Prussian publics, ending with the French suing for war. Britain at this time opted not to interfere as their policy was to maintain a balance of power on the continent, and a strong Prussia would be a good counterweight to a strong France who was interfering with Britain's colonial ambitions in Africa and Asia. The southern independent German states disliked how France opted for war so quickly over what they perceived as an insult and allied themselves with the northern German Confederation to curb French aggression. The French and Prussian armies were of similar size and experience, but the Prussians stood out with the brilliance of their generals and use of railroad logistics. The Prussians used this advantage to mobilize their forces quicker and defeat France in several key battles and even capture Napoleon III. Meanwhile, a revolution took place in Paris and the French Republic was restored, while the Northern German Confederation and Southern Independent German Kingdoms unified in January 1871 to become the German Empire because of the decline of Austria and to reap the benefits of the Prussian economy and military. With the Germans laying a brutal siege on Paris, the French surrendered. Large portions of France were occupied until France paid a massive war debt and the new German Empire seized territory from France. This created French hostilities and resentment towards the Germans as the Germans continued to grow in political, economic, and military might. The 1871 Treaty of Frankfurt was so harsh and humiliated France so badly, France got the revenge on the Germans in the 1919 Treaty of Versailles. Seeds of war. After the American and French revolutions, nationalism began to rise in Europe as people felt they should govern themselves and not be a part of multi ethnic empires like the Austro Hungarian and Ottoman empires that did not hold their cultural heritage and ideals in mind. With the rise of Romanticism, which glorified the culture and past of a people, and racialism, which stated that one particular race or group was superior to the other, more and more Europeans demanded their own state and thought that their nation was superior to others. With Kaiser Wilhelm II proclaiming that Germany will no longer be treated as a second rate power, he built up the German army and navy so that Germany can have its place under the sun. This large German navy that the Kaiser envisioned would be able to assist in Germany's attempts to gain colonies as well as further German economic interests around the world, as he felt Germany was excluded from having a true colonial empire. This alarmed Britain, France, and Russia, who allied themselves with each other to counterbalance Germany and its allies and build up their militaries. Germany also was alarmed at the pace of Russian modernization, especially with the growth of their rail network, which could help them mobilize their troops at a much faster rate than before. With tensions that high, it would only take a small spark to ignite Europe into a deadly conflict. Thank you.